I strongly advise everyone to stop following the news. People who consume a lot of the news become actively misinformed about the state of the world. They become more pessimistic, cynical.
There are so many things, as you mentioned, that are out there that are so much better to be able to feed your mind with and feed your children's mind with.
There are so many people who are currently stuck in jobs that don't really contribute to the world.
You're a historian and a philosopher. What made you want to get into that sort of work?
I had a little bit of an early midlife crisis. I became a bit frustrated with myself.
I think there are a lot of people who like this idea of wanting to leave with this legacy, more so for their name to be said, rather than the fact that they may have done something that just put good into the world.
It's really important to make this distinction between popularity, having a lot of followers. You become a good person by doing good things.
Noble losers is an interesting term. I've never heard of that before.
They feel really good about themselves. I can wash my hands in innocence. I'm standing on the right side of history. But we see that time and time and again, that the purest attitude, it doesn't actually help. Maybe a century from now, we will look back on the way we treat animals today with great shame.
I agree. People don't seem to want to listen to other sides at all. I wonder how people get to be like that.
I think it's...
Rutger, you open your new book with people may spend their whole lives climbing the ladder of success, only to find once they reach the top, the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. It's a quote by Alan Rain. I want you to talk a little bit about that and why you believe that.
This book is about redefining success, redefining what it means to live a really valuable, meaningful life. And I think if you ask yourself the question, what is wrong in society today? I think there's one overarching big meta problem, which is we've redefined success in the wrong way. And the result of that is an enormous waste of talent. There are so many people who are currently stuck in jobs that don't really contribute to the world, don't really make the world a better place, let alone a much better place. So that's the reason I wrote this book, because I think this is what we desperately need today in the fight against some of the greatest challenges. We need to redefine what it means to be successful.
You're a historian and a philosopher. What made you want to get into that sort of work?
Oh, that's a good question. I've got a very long answer to that one, but I'll try to keep it short. I spent about a decade of my career writing articles, writing books, standing on many stages, many countries. Been to Australia in 2017, and enjoyed all of that immensely. But I also got to admit that after a decade of doing that, I had a little bit of an early midlife crisis. I became a bit frustrated with myself. Here I was standing on the sidelines, providing commentary on the real players in the arena, and giving my opinions, hoping that some other people would do the actual work of making the world a better place. So I wanted to write a book that would force me to change my own life and would make my own life a little bit more challenging, more difficult. In that sense, this book is like a traditional self-help book, but with a twist. So it's not really going to make you much happier, at least not at first, or more productive or more mindful or whatever. It's more about making your life more challenging. And in the book, I use my craft. I've been trained as a historian. I use many stories of people in the past who were moral pioneers, and I try to learn from them and share some of their greatest lessons.
History is an interesting thing, and obviously something we should always be looking at, right? Because in life, where do we learn from our mistakes? It's harder, as we know, in personal development to learn from the good times. Anyone you speak to who's had a dark night of the soul or some sort of really great trauma, a lot of their learnings come from that. And I wonder for you, why has history played such an important role in your life that you would then go on to make it part of your job?
So, to be really honest, the reason I decided to study history was, one, because I really, really liked it. I've always just believed it's fascinating. I mean, the past is another country. That's a famous expression. It's like you could just travel, but you don't have to pay for, you know, lodging somewhere or buy an airplane ticket or anything like that. You can just open a book and the journey starts immediately. And I've just always loved that. I've always been utterly fascinated by the fact that the past is so different. It's so strange. And, you know, that this is for me the most important lesson of history is that things that we now consider completely bizarre or unthinkable may very well be inevitable in the future. And this has happened again and again and again, for better or for worse. So take abolitionism, for example. I write a lot about that in this book. The people who fought against the slave trade and against slavery. Well, for us today, that is like it's like obvious that if you're a good person, then obviously you got to be against slavery, right? I mean, that's like the bare moral minimum. But in the mid 18th century, that was very different. Slavery was an utterly normal part of most economies, and it wasn't just Western European countries that practiced slavery on a huge scale, but it was basically everywhere. You know, the Aztecs and the Incas, many African rulers, obviously, in the East as well. And this thing called abolitionism, the idea that you could utterly abolish, just outlaw the institution of slavery, that was a new idea. Someone had to come up with that. And that was, you know, the first abolitionist. So anyway, I've just always been fascinated by history. The second reason I decided to study it is that it seemed relatively easy compared to physics or biology or something like that.
It is fascinating. I've always loved history as well and studied it at school for many years. And then, you know, when it was optional to keep studying it, I kept studying it because I absolutely loved it. I want to talk now about this idea about jobs and how you said that a lot of the time, well, you used the quote that the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall in regards to people on the path to success and wanting to achieve things. But then you also talk about this idea of honor and leaving the world with having good being done rather than just having a good reputation, which is an interesting concept, you know, because I think there are a lot of people who like this idea of wanting to leave with this legacy more so for their name to be said rather than the fact that they may have done something that just put good into the world. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it's really important to make this distinction between popularity on the one hand, being liked by a lot of people, having a lot of followers on Instagram or whatever social media platform you prefer, and honor. And honor is very different. Honor is about being popular for the right reasons or being liked by the people you respect, which is very different, right? If I write an article that does, I don't know, really well on social media, but I have the feeling that it was actually a little bit of an easy article, you know, it's a little bit of clickbait, then sure, it may make me popular, but it doesn't really give me that feeling that I've achieved something meaningful. But then if I write something, I mean, just before the show, we were talking about a philosopher whom I write about in the book as well, Peter Singer, you know, the great Australian philosopher. Like if Peter Singer would call me up and say, Rutger, that's a brilliant article, I mean, that would be much more meaningful for me, obviously, because I respect him immensely. So it's important to make that distinction, I guess. And that very much is a part of what it means to redefine what it is to be successful. So take these abolitionists again. They were incredibly unpopular, actually. Many people really, really hated them. The very first abolitionist in the US was a man named Benjamin Lay. He was a Quaker, which was a radical Christian sect. And he was even expelled out of 4 Quaker meetings because they thought he was so annoying. You know, he kept breaking teacups and, you know, shouting at slaveholders and slave owners. He was just like worse than the worst vegan today. But now, obviously, we consider him one of the great figures of the 18th century, right? He was on the right side of history way before it was fashionable. So that it's important to make that distinction.
It's interesting talking about the slavery topic, where it was the norm for people back in that day, as you said, and it was done in a lot of countries, right? So from your research, what was the mindset that made someone realize this is not okay. So, if something is very common and you see a lot of people doing it, human nature would be like, well, this becomes normal, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder what was in that man that you just spoke about. Like, what would he have thought to say, this is not normal, though. This is not something we should be doing.
Yeah. So at the heart of Quakerism was a very deep belief in equality. So the Quakers also had the very first women preachers, for example. About a fifth of all books written by women in England in the 17th century were written by Quakers, even though they were just less than a percentage of the population. So equality was very much at the heart of the Quaker belief. They believed that there is a little bit of God in each and every one of us. And so surely that was, a very fertile religious ground to base abolitionism upon. But it took some time, actually. It took many decades, because initially there were quite a few Quakers who owned slaves as well, and who practiced the slave trade. But then some radicals within that society said, hey, but if we really believe in this equality thing, does it really make sense to only apply it to white people, or only to people, who aren't enslaved? And that's what got it started. So I think this has been the most common moral mistake that we people have made throughout history, is we make our circles too small. We say, like, only people like us, like only our family, or only our friends, or only people in this nation, or only people in this religious group. And a big driver of moral progress throughout the ages has been the expansion of the moral circle. So it's not a surprise to me that actually a lot of the first abolitionists also cared quite deeply about animal rights, because it's only logical, right? Once you start expanding your moral circle, then why stop? Many of the first suffragettes were abolitionists, right? So there is a certain logic to this. Once you become an abolitionist, you become a suffragette, you care about civil rights, you start caring about animal rights, etc., etc. So I think that we today have the moral duty to, to take the flame and to continue the movement, because we're not done yet.
It's interesting that you bring up animal rights, because you obviously talk about it in your book. And this is something that I have thought about a lot. And, as I mentioned to you before we started, I toured the other year with Peter Singer on his book tour. And I mean, he is the godfather of animal activism and has the very famous book about it. And there was a period of time where I was vegetarian and then got really iron deficient and became like unwell. So started eating meat again. But not obviously, but I really do care for animals. I've been brought up always with a family that very much cares for animals, and animals, have always been a big part of my life. So it's that moral thing of then also going, well, I've also been on safari in Africa and understand that there is like a food chain, and you go out and you see, the lions hunting whatever animal it is, and they're all kind of killing each other to be able to eat as well. And so there are all these things going through my mind, because I've then also watched the zillions of horrible videos out there about, a lot of animals being treated absolutely in shocking conditions for science. Or, I went in Indonesia once by mistake to this chicken farm. And it was awful, like thousands and thousands of chickens, like a lot of them dead. And you talk about that in your book. And there was like a girl who was about, I don't know, she would have been maybe 10. And her job was literally to walk through and pick up the dead chickens by their legs and like throw them away. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this place exists. And it exists on my backyard, in the sense of Peter Singer told me there were places like that, not far from where I live in Australia. So I wonder what your belief is, and I know everyone is different, when it comes to this moral judgment that we have about obviously caring for animals and wanting the best for them, but that at the same time knowing that eating protein, and I know you can get it in other forms, but meat is also for a lot of people an essential part of their diet.
Look, it's a really hard question, and there's a lot to say about this. I think we got to start with acknowledging some basic facts, though, because the there's an utter lack of knowledge. A
Yeah.
lot of people don't really know how their food is being made and how the animals that they eat are treated. We have an enormous amount of propaganda. I have little kids. Our oldest is almost 4 years old. And if you just look at all those books, about the farms and the lovely pigs and the cows and the lovely lives they're leading, sorry, but that's not how it works. So there are, great farmers out there who still do it, I guess, the old-fashioned way. But 98, 99% of our meat is factory farm meat, comes from industrial agriculture. And that's the reason why we're able to consume so much more meat today than we did 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So we've been eating way more meat in the past. And obviously, there are also many more people today on this planet. So yeah, that's really important to recognize those basic facts. Like currently, half of all habitable land is used for agriculture, and 3/4 of that is for meat production. Even though it contributes much, much less to our diet in terms of calories and proteins. So the system we have today, it's just it can't go on like this. If you take something like chicken, for example, today, if you eat a chicken, you will probably either eat a Cobb 500 or a Ross 308. That's what the two chicken species are called, the factory farms. So those are two really big companies, Cobb Ventris and Aviagen, and they spent many decades in R&D to crossbreed the perfect chicken. And by perfect, I don't mean the most happy chicken, but the most productive chicken. And the more productive the animal is, the more miserable its life. That's basically how it works, because then you squeeze all the efficiency out of it. Now, if you delve into the literature about the lives of these animals, it's really depressing. Sorry, we all know that you don't want to have a vegan at the dinner table because the topic becomes very depressing very quickly. But it was probably just like that with an abolitionist in the 18th century. It's like you wouldn't want to go out for dinner with Benjamin Lay because you would start feeling guilty quite soon. I still think it's important to acknowledge those basic facts, though, and then we can start talking about solutions. I don't believe that just shaming people and just shouting "Go vegan" all day is going to get us there. The animal rights movement has tried that for half a century, and it hasn't worked all that well. So I'm a big believer in innovation. Actually, I'm super excited about alternative proteins, about the potential of clean meat, of precision fermentation. I think we may really be, at the beginning of a new green revolution where we'll find ways to make much healthier, just as tasty, or maybe even tastier and cheaper forms of protein that work for all. But the reality is that there's still a lot of work to be done. A lot of people need to be working on this. Scientists, lobbyists, you name it. We're at the very beginning. So I'm hopeful about that, but I'm not very hopeful about the state of factory farming today, because just the honest reality is that the vast majority of us, if we would really see a little video of the animals we eat, most of us would lose our appetite quite quickly.
Oh, absolutely. Are you vegetarian or vegan?
Yeah, I'm vegetarian and pretty much vegan, but I don't want to be, super purist about this.
Yeah.
You have these vegans who are like, oh, is there a little bit of milk powder in this or that? Look, it's not about me, it's about the system that we want to change. And I want to do my contribution there. So for me, it's not a big sacrifice. A good friend of mine has the same thing as you have. Like, finds it really difficult to get our iron from plant-based products. So I do recognize that it's more difficult for others, and I'm not in the business of shaming them for it. I do think that, though, as a society, we can really move towards a much, much different system.
Yeah.
And I also suspect that as a historian, that maybe a century from now, we will look back on the way we treat animals today with great shame.
I agree. It's honestly like when you do see some of those factory farms, it's heartbreaking. Like I have seen them, and it's awful. And even just in the name of science, the way they treat those rabbits and dogs when they're, a lot of the cosmetic industries is shocking. That they're like put in cages, and it's horrible. So I think
The
we do
numbers
need to
though
think
are
about this stuff.
The numbers though, again, Sarah, are important to keep in mind. So like animal testing is very small compared to factory farming.
Is it?
So factory
Oh, that's
farming,
good to know.
yeah. So factory farming is 80 billion animals each year, and
Wow.
mostly chickens. So 70 billion chickens each year. And just for a comparison, the total amount of all humans who have ever lived on this planet, in the last 300,000 years, is estimated at 117 billion. So it just takes us a year and a half to slaughter as many animals today. And then I'm not even counting the fish or the shrimp. So it is really mind-boggling, the scale of it. And then if you look at how much funding is going to animal welfare organizations that, want to do something about factory farming, it's just a small, tiny percentage of everything that's going to animal shelters, etc., to the more charismatic animals. Because we all love our dogs and our cats, which is, again, so strange, right? If we imagine a factory farm with, 50,000 dogs being treated the way we treat pigs or chickens, right? You would immediately be put in prison. So we're making that very simple moral mistake once again, is that we have we're not expanding the moral circle far enough. We say like, yeah, dogs have rights, but pigs don't, which is like, why?
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I think a lot of philosophy and ethics works on this understanding of really just thinking about it, and that's why this conversation is so important. Like, we might not have all the answers in it, but if people who are listening right now are actually like thinking about things differently, then it's up to them what they want to do. And
and that's also, that's the reason why I wrote this book, is there are a lot of things we can do. So we can follow in the footsteps of the great moral pioneers, and that's what it means to be morally ambitious, to take on some of the greatest challenges we face as a species, whether that's factory farming, climate change, the threat of a new pandemic, some of the most terrible diseases. We can do things about it. Small groups of thoughtful, committed citizens, as Margaret Mead once said, they can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. So again, history gives us good reasons to be hopeful here.
You say something which I believe to be very true, and I teach a lot of people, is that following the media constantly is not a good idea. And in personal development and mindset, which I teach on, I say to people, if you're watching the news every night, if you're listening to it all day on radio, you're not going to have a happy disposition, because we're being bombarded with the most horrific things in the world. And a lot of the time, we don't need to know the ins and outs of what's going on in every country in the world. Where most people are good, they get affected by hearing very negative information. But I want you to talk to that as well and give your opinion on why you believe that to be true.
Yeah, so I strongly advise everyone to stop following the news. And sometimes people are like, well, that's so irresponsible, right? It isn't like the news that is really a part of democracy, and you got to follow that if you want to be a good citizen. And then I'm like, no, I'm not against good journalism. I'm very much in favor of good journalism, but the news is different. The news is the daily barrage of incidents, the stuff that happens today instead of the stuff that happens every day. We have so much evidence now from psychology, from sociology, that people who consume a lot of the news become actively misinformed about the state of the world. They become more pessimistic. They become more cynical. The news is just a very weird product, if you think about it. Most people don't even want to read yesterday's newspaper, which is very strange if you think about it. I mean, how worthless must the newspaper be if you can if you cannot read it the next day, right? Then the information must be absolute garbage in the newspaper, right? So that's the thing. Like, judge the quality of the information also on its life expectancy. So I hope we're now recording a podcast that people can still listen to 30 half a year or something from now, or maybe even 2 years if it's interesting enough. And I think if we manage to achieve that, then it says something about the quality of the conversation, the quality of the information. So yeah, that's very much what I recommend, is try and zoom out, try to find different sources of information that help you look at the structural forces that govern our lives, that govern our societies. And that's pretty much the opposite of the news. It's not necessarily all optimistic, right? So you have some websites that are like, oh, we're only going to tell you about the good things in the world, the positive news. And I don't really like that either, because there's some really bad stuff out there. I mean, we just talked quite extensively about factory farming, which isn't in the news every day, but it is very important, that we know more about it. So yeah, it's both the good things and the bad things. Yeah, try and zoom out as much as possible. Read the books, listen to long podcasts, go to a website like Our World in Data. There are so many great sources out there, but don't bother with the news. It's just a big waste of time.
I do, like I said to you, that is something I teach people. And I really, from my own experience of someone who followed the news when I was a producer very closely, because I was working on a radio show where we had to know what was going on, my disposition of happiness was so much lower than what it is now, because I was like constantly filling my mind with everything that was going on in the news, from a car accident to a fire to whatever it was. And you don't even realize how much that gets to you. So I just want people to really think about that when they think about turning on the news. And especially if you have kids, you have to remember that you might think they're young and they don't understand what's going on, but they do. And they're seeing the pictures and they're seeing war and whatever it is. And that affects their psyche too. So we don't have any news on ever in our household. So when you put it on by mistake, it's one of those things, you're not used to it and you're like, oh my gosh. So please don't let that be your norm. There are so many things, as you mentioned, that are out there that are so much better to be able to feed your mind with and feed your children's mind with.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And look, when I think about raising our kids, I don't want to put them on a diet where, the first time they'll ever discover that there's such a thing as war is maybe when they're 18 or something. I mean, I wouldn't advise that to parents. I just had a couple of fascinating and wonderful conversations with my daughter, who's barely 4, about death. She's really starting to explore the concept. Yeah, it's not my inclination to say like, oh, it doesn't exist, or to give her some fairy tales that I don't believe in. I think we can take our kids seriously and think seriously about their questions. But I totally agree with you about the news. And this, again, it's been well documented. So there's a psychologist / sociologist, George Gerbner. He's actually passed away quite some time now. But he called this the mean world syndrome, and really showed that it exists. So people who follow much more of the news, on average, are more cynical and tend to be more distrusting of others as well. Which is another one of those diseases, at the very heart of our society today, is that trust is collapsing. So again, the news doesn't help there. Yeah.
I want to know, you talk about, these people who in history, Martin Luther King, there's plenty of people out there who have changed the world, Nelson Mandela, through their activism. And I was thinking about that quite a bit, in the sense of a lot of the time we feel that we can't make change. But the only way people make change sometimes is on a small level first, and then that echoes and becomes bigger and bigger. And I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about that. And also in regards to the fact where I think some people get so obsessed with it's their way or the highway. So, they're on one side of history and other people are on the other side of history, and they're just, fighting for different teams, especially in wartime. And your beliefs on, how that works, is that a good thing, and what kind of research you've done within that space?
Yes. So let me give you an example. I think it was 2021, 2022, there was a total breakdown among progressive organizations in the United States. So this was the time when Roe v. Wade was being abolished, in the Dobbs decision by the Supreme Court. And you would expect that, for example, pro-choice organizations would be fighting that decision very strongly. But actually, they were fighting internally. They were fighting each other. Because at the time, there was a very strong purist tendency among idealists. They were really, as you described, like my way or the highway, right? I will only cooperate with people who agree with me on all the little things, right? It's only this very specific form of feminism that we're practicing here, and all the other people, well, there's the door. And I would sometimes, have debates with those kind of activists, and I would say, well, look, that's not really how it works, right? You got to build a coalition. And then they would say, well, do you think the abolitionists did that? They stood for their ideals. And I was like, well, yeah, they did that as well. They built very impressive coalitions, actually, and they compromised a lot. So in the book, I write, for example, about the British Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade, that initially decided not to fight slavery itself, but only focus on the slave trade, because they believed, and rightly so, that would be politically less controversial. So it would be easier to get more people behind that. And you know what the most effective argument was that they used in Parliament? Not the suffering of the slaves. I mean, people, that didn't really resonate all that much. They said, look, we've done extensive research and we've discovered that 20% of white British sailors die on these slave ships during a voyage. Isn't that outrageous? Whoa, boom, that was a super effective political argument. And I honestly, I deeply admire that pragmatism, because if you truly care about 100 billion animals who are currently in factory farms, if you truly care about the 15,000 kids who die every day from easily preventable diseases, if you really want to prevent, the rise of autocracy, and you're like, oh shit, Democrats really need to win the next election unless we're like in a very bad place, well, then you got to win, then you got to achieve results. Then winning is a moral duty. And if history teaches us one thing, it's that, yeah, sometimes you got to make compromises for that. Actually, quite often you got to make compromises. And quite often you got to work together with people who don't agree with you on all things. I mean, the Quakers initially didn't get much done because they were this weird Protestant sect. People didn't really take them seriously. But once they started working together with the evangelicals, who were much more popular, right, more charismatic, etc., and had a much broader appeal, well, that's really when the movement got started in Britain. So we see that time and time and again, that the purist attitude, it doesn't actually help. So I call those people, I call them noble losers. They feel really good about themselves. They say, look, I can wash my hands in innocence. I'm standing on the right side of history. But the people who are currently suffering, they don't really care about your purity.
Yeah.
They want you to win.
It's interesting because, noble losers is an interesting term. I've never heard of that before. But I find sometimes I see those sort of people bully other people, and that's what makes me upset, where they get on their high horse. And we saw it a bit in COVID with vaccines, and, people were for or against, whatever, and they would bully the other side big time. Or we see it in wartime, as I mentioned to you as well. You're on this side, you're on that side. And if you're not on this side, we're going to absolutely, be really mean to you because we feel that you should be on this side too, or whatever it is. And I wonder, what's going on with the psyche there. I feel a lot of the time sometimes it's like the community that you're brought up in, your parents, whatever it is, and you feel like almost brainwashed that this is the only way. Like these people don't seem to want to listen to other sides at all. And they don't even have to listen to be able to change their mind, but just listening does open you up to hearing something different. It's like you're in your own echo chamber if you're never going to be able to want to hear someone who you might not like's just opinion on something, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder how people get to be like that.
I think it's a deep part of human nature. So humans are very groupish. We are very tribal. And there are many different kind of groups and tribes today. So you can be like the pro-vaccine or the anti-vaccine tribe, or the Democrats or the Republicans, left wing, right wing. Like you can be the mindfulness tribe, or you can be the extreme sports tribe, etc., etc. And once you become part of a group like that, it really becomes part of your identity. And then there are certain opinions attached to that identity that are just really difficult to give up, simply because you love the people in your own group so much, right? They're your friends. They're your family members. Just think about how difficult it is for someone to leave a very orthodox, strict church. You're not just leaving certain opinions behind, you're leaving your loved ones behind, right? And I think that is really what we see at play in those kind of discussions, is that people, it's not really about the opinion itself anymore, but it is about your very existence, your identity, your how you are part of a certain group. And people just find that really hard to juggle. I think what a part of, becoming an adult or becoming a little bit wiser in life is that you learn how to hold your identities more lightly, or that on the one hand, you can be, I don't know, a very passionate, I don't know, soccer fan of this or that team, or you can have very strong beliefs, but at the same time recognize that some other people, come from somewhere else. But that's just difficult. I don't think it comes natural to us. We have, and there's probably some evolutionary reason for this, is that we have evolved to really be very attached to certain groups, to be tribal, and that then also happens to our opinions.
I find that so interesting.
Yeah, and we mostly see it with others, by the way. So it's always very easy to see when others do it, but we find it more difficult when we suffer from the same problem.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. I wonder, you talk about the fact, and this is nice for people to hear, that the majority of humans, and this is my belief too, are good people. And we see this a lot when there are, cyclones or natural disasters or whatever it is, where people need to like get together and really help one another. Because I feel like a lot of the time, again, and this, goes hand in hand with the news, that people believe that majority of people are not good and they're selfish and they just want to help themselves. But really, that's not the truth of the research that you have done.
Yeah, this is what I wrote my previous book about. It's called Humankind, A Hopeful History. And I spent about 5 years trying to show that we humans are wired to work together. That we are the product of what some evolutionary psychologists call survival of the friendliest, which means that for many millennia, when we were still hunter-gatherers, and as you probably know, the biggest part of our existence for the longest time, we lived as hunter-gatherers. This was like the environment in which we evolved. In those times, it was actually adaptive to be more friendly. So it was the friendliest among us who had the most kids and had the biggest chance of passing on their genes to the next generation, which is very much the opposite of what a lot of people believe. In Western culture, there is this theory called veneer theory, the idea that our civilization is just a thin veneer, just a thin layer, and that below that lies raw human nature, that deep down we are just these beasts, these monsters who will very quickly turn on each other as soon as something happens, that we are fundamentally selfish. And that theory is just utterly wrong. It's been totally debunked in the last couple of decades by psychologists, by anthropologists, by sociologists, even by economists. It's just not true. That doesn't mean we are angels or anything like that. Absolutely not. I mean, we just talked quite extensively about some of the really bad stuff we do. But it does mean that at the heart of human nature, there is something quite good and quite hopeful that we can build upon. For me, it's always the simplest example here is maybe that we just really enjoy being good to one another, right? We get this psychological bonus. We live in a world where if you are kind to someone else, like perform a small act of kindness each day, well, it feels really good, doesn't it? And isn't that wonderful? And then sometimes people say, "Oh, yeah, but Rutger, doesn't that mean that altruism is selfishness after all?" And I'm like, "What are you saying? Would you prefer to live in a world where every time you help someone, you immediately become nauseous or something like that? Is is that what a better world would look like?" I'm like, "No, I'm glad we live in a world where doing good very often also feels good." And we live also in a world where doing bad, I mean, we know this from people who are sent to wars, or soldiers who come back from war are very often traumatized, because this is like not what we're quote unquote meant to do. I don't really believe evolution has like a purpose, like a divine purpose, but like this is not our great superpower as a species, to hurt one another, because we are very often pay a psychological price ourselves as well for that. So yeah, for me, that is a reason to be hopeful. It is something we can build on. If we design our societies, our schools, our democracies, even our prisons around the idea that most people deep down are fundamentally decent, I think we can truly revolutionize our society and make the world a wildly better place.
I agree. You bring up a lot of the World War II stories within your book, and you talk about the idea that there were families or people that were the ones kind of hiding the Jewish people that were being persecuted, and these were a lot of the Germans. And I wonder what you've found, how some got the courage to actually, either hide people or the Jewish people, or stand up for them. Or a lot of the time, if they stand up for them, they would be dead too. But more so, I suppose, make sure that they were, looking after them as best they could.
Yeah. So as a young boy in primary school, I was already utterly obsessed with the Second World War. It's the only thing I would read about and write about. And I kept asking myself this question, like, what would I have done if I were alive back then, right? How do people respond to situations like that? And I guess for a long time, I believed what most people believe, which is that it just takes some really exceptional people. Like, some people are super altruistic. Some people are just heroes, and they do the right thing, even when it's really, really tough to do the right thing. That's what I used to believe for a long time. But for this book, I delved into the research, the psychology, and also the sociology of resistance heroes. And in the 1980s, there were two psychologists, Samuel and Paul Olener, who did hundreds of interviews with resistance heroes, people who had the courage, either in the Netherlands or in Belgium or in France or in Poland, to hide persecuted Jews, which was incredibly brave, obviously, and very risky as well. And they tried to find out, what was the personality type of these people? Was there something like an altruistic personality? Did they have something in common? And it's really interesting, because if you look in the appendix of that book, there are all the statistical results. And, people who have studied, statistics in university, they will know the difference between, a significant result and a non-significant result. And it's interesting that in that appendix, every single time you see these two letters, like NS, 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 meaning non-significant, non-significant, non-significant. They basically couldn't find anything. they were stumped. They were like, there isn't really a psychological profile of these people. They could be rich, they could be poor, they could be really outspoken, they could be quite shy, they could be young, old, men, women. It was like all over the place. And then some of them attended these ceremonies in Israel where people were being honored because of their extraordinary courage, like by this organization called Yad Vashem. And it seemed like a cross section of the population. It seemed like you just walked into, a random subway car, and you were like, okay, it's really the cross section. So for quite some time, researchers didn't really understand what was going on until they started looking at the data again, and they found that there was actually one really powerful predictor of whether someone had joined the resistance, yes or no. And it was pretty simple. It was, were you asked to join by someone else? And in 96% of all cases, when someone was being asked to join the resistance, they said yes. And this opened up a whole new area of research. People suddenly realized that they shouldn't talk about the psychology of resistance. It's not like your specific character traits, how you were born, what kind of person you are, or your genetics or whatever. No, it's about what you can become and how you can be infected by a certain kind of heroism, a kind of what I would call a moral ambition. And this also explains why resistance heroism was very much a local phenomenon. It spread in certain regions because there were certain people who took the step, and then they started asking others, and these people started asking others. It very much spread like a virus would. I think that is a really beautiful and hopeful lesson for us today, because we don't have to ask ourselves this question that I asked myself as a boy all the time, like, oh, am I the person who does something like this or not? Oh, I guess I'll never know. That's not really how it works. You don't do good things because you are a good person. You become a good person by doing good things. So just get started, surround yourself with morally ambitious, altruistic people who are doing good work, and you will be surprised how quickly you can change and that you can become a very different person.
Can you define altruism to us?
Sure. So I think that altruism is basically about caring for other people. We all have a natural altruism within us, right? We care about our friends, our family, our kids. Moral ambition is very much about expanding that altruism. That doesn't mean you suddenly start caring more for, a refugee far away than for your own kids. I think it's always like utterly normal and a part of human nature to care most about those, who are very close to one another, unless you want to become a saint, right? I mean, you mentioned Mahatma Gandhi earlier. He would say, I don't really love like specific people. I love all of humanity. Yeah, that's not really how I want to live my life. Sorry, I really love my my wife and my kids much more than other people. But I have a lot of space left in my heart after that. And it's also not a zero-sum game, right? It's a positive-sum game. It can grow. So for me, that's very much what altruism is about caring for others.
Mm. There was that very interesting thought experiment that you mentioned in your book that Peter Singer wrote about many years ago. The idea that you're walking, and this is obviously paraphrased, and there's someone, a young child, that is drowning in a pond, and he's asking, you're wearing your nice shoes or this and that, and they'll get wet or da-da-da. And everyone's like, oh, my God, of course, there's no way if I saw a child drowning that I wouldn't absolutely jump in to get the child out, no questions asked. And then his thought experiment goes on to talk about the fact, well, there are millions of kids dying every day that you could help out by donating X amount of money. And I mean, these thought experiments are so interesting, right? And that's why I love, what we're talking about today, this idea of philosophy and ethics and altruism. It's like, why don't we as a human race then all donate money? Because it's not in our backyard. I mean, a lot of the research shows that we like to kind of help what we can see, what we know. But I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I've always thought that is a fascinating thought experiment, but I never really liked it. Because to me, it came across as a form of moral blackmail, where now suddenly Like, I have to feel guilty about the fact that indeed 15,000 kids die every day from easily preventable diseases. And, am I now killing these people or something like that by not doing anything? I mean, it's a really radical thought experiment that has made some people also pretty unhappy. And it's just not really the way that I want to live my life. I like to approach it in a different way. I mean, the fact that we live in a world where there are still so many big problems also means that there are great opportunities for us to do a lot of good. And I think it makes sense to think a little bit like an entrepreneur, as a do-gooder, as an idealist. So if you help one person, that's great. You've helped one person, good for you. But yeah, if you help two people, well, I've done the math, that is twice as much. So that's more, and more is more. This is really important to recognize and understand in the fight against some of these great challenges. And then some challenges are so big that we can do an enormous amount of good. In the book, I talk about malaria, for example. I mean, malaria is one of the great killers still in the world today. 600,000 people die from it every year, mostly kids under 5. But we've got the solutions. We know what to do about it. Like malaria, insecticide-treated malaria bed nets are incredibly effective. And I tell the story of Rob Mater, a former manager and a former consultant who quit his job to start the Against Malaria Foundation, which is, like the Real Madrid of the charity world, like the very best charity probably out there. And they need about $5,000 to save one kid's life. I mean, that's extraordinary that is possible. Now, if I spent $5,000 on, I don't know, something else, something for me, I don't feel guilty about that. I'm like, oh, now I'm suddenly killing a kid's life or something like that. No, but if I am donating, which I've started to do, but partially influenced by Peter Singer, I actually feel pretty good about it. It's a little bit like my stocks portfolio, right? I now also have my philanthropy portfolio. I've got these great organizations that I've researched thoroughly, and I know that the money is doing great work, helping people, saving kids' lives. It's an amazing feeling. So anyway, long answer, but that has worked better for me than thinking about all the drowning kids that I'm currently not saving.
Tell me, what is some of the best advice that you have ever been given?
The very best advice. Okay, so in the second chapter, the beginning of the second chapter, I quote an American economist whose name is Tyler Cowen. And he wrote this short blog post once about the contagiousness of ambition. He said, one of the most valuable things you can do with your life and with your time is to increase other people's levels of ambition. You can approach people and say, hey, Sarah, I see that you're doing this right now. That's really cool. I love what you're doing. I think you can probably do twice as much. Or you could do this. That may seem a little bit more difficult, but I think you can do that. Like, if you do that, like, it would cost me very little time, right? It's a very small investment. And the potential impact on you is very profound, and also for the rest of the world. So that simple advice has partially led me to co-found this organization called the School for Moral Ambition, which is founded upon the ideas in the book. We want to help as many people as possible to devote their careers to some of the greatest challenges of their time. And just like with the resistance heroes, we very often believe that just asking them is enough. Just approaching them and saying like, hey, wow, you are so incredibly talented. Just, whoa, look at your resume. You could go on and achieve amazing things, but I noticed that you're currently working for McKinsey. I mean, that's impressive, but it's not, you're not really working at the greatest problems out there, are you? Wouldn't you like to do way more good? So that's the organization we started. We like to see ourselves as the Robin Hoods of talent. Robin Hood took the money away from the rich and gave it to the poor. Well, we take the talent away from the McKinseys of this world, and we give it to the most urgent, pressing cause areas of our time.
What's something that you wish for yourself?
Oh, that's a good question. I recently had a conversation about this with ChatGPT. There was this prompt going around that encouraged ChatGPT to sort of become your therapist and to unveil your deepest fears. Um, and yeah, ChatGPT was pretty spot on. It immediately zoomed in on my eternal fear of death, and most importantly, my fear of insignificance, of leading a life that is just not really, you know, worthwhile telling. You know, that it's just, I don't know, a bit boring perhaps. I guess that's one of my greatest fears. Not necessarily that I desperately want to be remembered, but I guess from an early age, I've been adventurous and looking for new ladders to climb. I've always loved that experience. You know, just the experience of going to a university and feeling really dumb. You know, and really having this feeling like, oh, there's so much to learn. Or then my first job, I utterly love that. Like, oh, I'm so young, and there are all these smart colleagues in here, you know, who've done this for such a long time, and I have so much more to learn. I've always thrived on that feeling. So I guess that's also why I co-founded this organization, is because after a decade of being a writer, you know, and doing the international book tours, I was a little bit like, it's cool, but you know, I've climbed this ladder now. Let's move on to the next one. Um, and I think in the process, I have also become much more idealistic. So morality has also become much more important. It's still probably a mixture of vanity and idealism, which I think is fine. People are mixed bags, right? We can be pluralists. We care about many things at the same time. But yeah, I think this is the fundamental thing that's driving me: a fear of insignificance, of nothingness, of living a life that's not really worth remembering.
Do you have a favorite prayer, saying, or mantra?
So I grew up in a Christian household. My father is a Protestant preacher, or he was actually. He retired 2 years ago, um, and I struggled quite a bit when I was 16, 17. I very much wanted to find God. I very much wanted to believe, and I was looking for the reasons and for the arguments. And I was also frustrated by quite a few of my peers who were, you know, in this evangelical church, and who told me that I just needed to surrender, right? Just believe. And that felt so intellectually dishonest to me. It felt like a form of cowardice to me. Like, oh, this is just motivated reasoning, right? You want this to be true, so you just surrender, you just believe. I was like, sure, I'm happy to believe, but first let me do some research, please. And so I did that, and I became agnostic. Or there were days I would call myself an atheist. I guess I would call myself more like an agnostic today. But that also meant that, like, some things that I really liked and cared about, in you know, from home, like, for example, prayer before you start eating. I find it funny that some people today have these, like, gratitude diaries, and they tell you, science has proved this, that if you're thankful for things, yeah, that is really good for your mental health. And I'm like, this is called praying, right? We have known this for quite some time. So I guess ever since leaving, quote unquote, church, I've been looking for ways to reintegrate spirituality and religion in my life. But I got to be honest, I've been struggling. I think having kids has made it more urgent. So initially we didn't really say anything before we started eating, which felt really bad. Felt like vulgar. Like, you don't just start eating, right? You have a moment with each other where you say something. So now we have a little bit of a saying where, the expression is in Dutch, so yeah, I can't really repeat it here. But it's it's all about being thankful for that you're there together, and that the food is here, and yeah, that we hope to be even closer to one another. So
That's beautiful.
hopefully this answers your question. But like no, I don't really
nice.
have a mantra that I repeat to myself every day or something. Maybe I will in a few years from now.
But the prayer, what you say, that is, like you said, it's a prayer, and that's beautiful. And our final question, what is a life of greatness to you?
as I said, I'm a pluralist, so I care about many things at the same time, and I don't really want to choose. I'm a father of 2 kids, and that is immensely important to me. When I'm playing with the Lego with my daughter, I'm not thinking about, I don't know, factory farming or solving malaria or anything like that. Um, but I also have a career, and I'm quite ambitious in that career. I've been ambitious in the traditional sense. As a writer, I wanted to, stand on a big stage and write important books and have big debates. But I'm also ambitious in an idealistic kind of way. I want to help a lot of people, and I believe that more is more in that respect. But then I also, I like music. I like having fun, and I think you can, as I said, you can be a pluralist, and I think that is very much what a great life is. It's a well-rounded life where, yeah, you you have a little bit, or no, not a little bit, quite a bit of all of that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the wonderful conversation today. It's been absolutely fascinating. Your new book is Moral Ambition. It's out now. Thank you for this discussion today.
Thanks, Sarah. Really loved it.